The story continues back in Soara where the new mayor, Joseph Bayezid, receives an unexpected letter from Dermer. He takes the sealed envelope from his green-eyed knight, feeling a little confused, so Sir Jaeger informs him that Baron Heinel was the one who sent it personally. The young master opens up the letter, and as he reads through, he asks Sir Jaeger if he noticed any movements in the west on his way here. In response, the knight reveals that Count Gaedar's army still hasn't moved yet, which leaves Master Joseph pondering a bit. He finds the news interesting, and after thinking about what it means for a few seconds, he asks Sir Jaeger when Vlad will return from the dragon hunting mission, and the knight claims that the last thing they heard about the blonde swordsman was his exceptional contribution in the subjugation of the Lindworm. Other than that, he admits that they don't have any other information about Vlad's whereabouts or when he will return. Hearing this, the mayor ponders deeply because he already knows that it would take at least 1 month for his favorite young servant to return. Sir Jaeger notices how worried his master is, so he asks the mayor if he needs Vlad for anything. The young master admits that he indeed needs the young boy from Soara, but since he isn't available right now, he figures that they'll have to be short on time. Joseph believes that the subjugation squad probably returned to Sturma after they finished their mission, and Sir Jaeger agrees with him that it's probably the case. Seeing that they're on the same page, the young master reveals that he'll be going to Sturma to meet up with the subjugation and his big brother. And of course, Jaeger already understands what this means, so he claims that he'll go prepare for the journey immediately. The one-eyed knight states this and then takes his leave to go make arrangements for the trip. As he makes his way out of the room, Joseph Bayezid gets lost in thought once again, recalling what he read in the letter and bracing himself for what is to come now that he knows how Count Gaedar wants to play this game. Even though the man didn't do anything visibly threatening, Joseph is convinced that the letter was definitely a move with specific intentions in mind. A part of him feels that this whole thing might really be a coincidence because he never thought that hopeful moment would become the silver lining to overcoming this problem. As it turns out, everything going on right now seems to be connected to Vlad's encounter with the Princess of Dermer, because it seems that the mistake that our boy made on that day was the best move that could have been made. The scene changes and we're taken back to the snowy hills of the Blood Duke's domain. There, Volkov returns to his father with news of their victory in the battle against Lindblum. The Blood Duke commends his son for doing a great job, so Volkov informs him that the Bayezid family helped them tremendously to achieve this. He claims that they were lucky enough to have the dragon killed by one of the Northerners, and as a result, the Dragon Killer Knights weren't able to come up with any excuse to interfere. Hearing all of this, the spiky-haired Duke simply asks where their biggest threat is at the moment. In response, Volkov informs his father that Mercia, that blonde fucker from before, has left with the Dragon Killer Knights. He assures his old man that the Knights of Bayezid will monitor those traitors closely until the very last moment. Upon hearing this, the red-eyed Blood Duke begins to piece things together. Since the White Dragon is dead and the Dragon Killer Squad has left, he believes that there are no reasons for them to rampage their lands anymore, which is a very good thing. As much as this is amazing news for them, the old man knows that this is temporary. After all, it will only be a matter of time before another dragon realizes their potential and decides to wreak havoc on the lands. He feels that these kinds of problems only keep coming up because they're safekeeping 2 fragments at the same time. For this reason, the Blood Duke decides that they have to split the dragon fragments up. Unfortunately, he's not sure who he can trust with such an important task. He stands before the 2 chain chests remaining while his son and one of his advisors stand next to him. Duke Baronoff is the guardian of the oath, so it's supposed to be his job, but now that he needs to split the fragments of the dragon up, he can only wonder who he can entrust one of them to. While the Blood Duke is busy being torn with that decision, the scene changes once again and we catch up with Sir Rudiger's party. Sir Lammond finally wakes up from his comatose state and the first person he sees is Vlad. Apparently, Vlad was the one moving him in a wagon, wrapped up in many thick clothes while he was unconscious, so when he opens his eyes and sees the blondie, he asks the kid if he thinks he's moving a corpse or something. In response, our boy explains that the wind is cold and claims that the veteran is being transported like that because they're still very far away from Sturma. Hearing this, the old geezer just scoffs at Vlad's excuse, informing him that a man is not scared of the cold. This old knight says this with so much confidence even though there are literally still pieces of ice all over his face. Seeing that Lammond wants to act all tough, he reminds the veteran how he literally said that his bones were aching earlier when he was blasted with the Lindblum's breath attack. As you can imagine, this is like a checkmate for Lammond because he can't even deny it. He's just pissed that the kid was able to remember that. Sure, he can boast about not being affected by the cold anymore, but he still doesn't want Vlad to tie him up any further because it's only a matter of time before his blood flow gets cut off. While those two are busy bickering, we see Rudiger and the blondie having a chat. The Bayezid son points out how preparations will soon be over and then asks the guy if he isn't going to Sturma with them. After all, Lord Mercia and his Dragon Killer Knights are important guests who came from far away, so he suggests that his father, Lord Bayezid, will be happy to see them. The blue-eyed schemer already knows that Rudiger doesn't like him, so of course, he politely declines the offer. He claims that it's a rare opportunity to go to Sturma but admits that he doesn't think he'll be able to have a peaceful life over there. As you can imagine, Rudiger doesn't actually want to blonde fucker around, so after his first refusal, he casually decides not to ask any further. Right now, he's only talking with Mercia just because it's his duty, not because he's enjoying it. He claims that it's embarrassing for him to let a faraway guest leave empty-handed. But since Volkov took the spear that was struck into the Lindblom's leg, he figures that Mercia should take something too. As such, he asks the man if he wants to at least take the tail back with him. Of course, Mercia's pride would never let him accept such a small part of the dragon when his original intention was to slay the creature itself. With this in mind, he politely declines Rudiger's offer once again, claiming that he'll just accept his well wishes instead. The Bayezid's son is clearly enjoying this conversation right now because he's got the upper hand. Both men are practically playing mind games with each other at the moment, and Rudiger is winning. He teases Mercia one more time, suggesting that it's better not to take anything since it would just be unnecessary luggage for their long journey back home. After making this statement, he goes on to inform the blonde man that Bayezid will deal with the barbarians that were caught as prisoners of war. That being said, he concludes by telling Mercia to henceforth leave the matters of the North to people of the North, and that he should enjoy his journey back. Mercia knows that he's lost this game already, so he doesn't even protest at all. He simply acknowledges Rudiger's wishes, and then before heading out, he requests to say his farewells to the new Dragon Slayer. This request catches Rudiger off guard, and he's uncertain for a second but ultimately decides to allow it, but only if the interaction will be for a moment. Hearing this, Mercia quickly starts walking toward Vlad, but along the way, Rudiger sternly warns him, claiming that he won't let him off the hook a second time if he dares pull any tricks again. In response, the arrogant blondie just pretends like he doesn't know what Rudiger is talking about. He asks the Bayezid's son what he means by that, and the latter just feels insulted that Mercia would think that he wouldn't learn of what he did to Vlad on the battlefield. In that moment, we get to see the flashback of our boy struggling after being struck with the binding spell. In that moment, when our boy was suddenly incapacitated in the middle of an intense fight with the dragon, Mercia was the one responsible, and Rudiger somehow managed to find out. Because of this, he now has more than one reason to despise the blonde fucker, so he makes it crystal clear to him that there will not be a second warning. Of course, Mercia gets the message instantly, so he assures Rudiger that he will need that warning. Right after that, he makes his way over to Vlad while thinking about what just happened. He feels that he acted too rashly, unlike his usual self, and he kind of regrets it because he realizes now that the encounter was an opportunity for him to see the world of Rudiger Bayezid. Unfortunately, he wasn't composed enough for that, and now he might never get another chance. Either way, he feels that there's no need to be disappointed since he already got to see the most important thing, which just happens to be our boy. While Vlad is busy trying to confirm that all their luggage has been packed properly, he's suddenly interrupted by Mercia, who approaches him. The sneaky bastard commends him for his impressive display on the battlefield. Of course, Vlad is pissed to even hear his voice, and the fact that he even has the balls to come over to talk to him makes it even more annoying. In response, our boy simply tells Mercia that he would have done even better if it wasn't for a certain someone. The arrogant man just keeps trying to piss him off at this point, claiming that he's glad to finally meet the one and only Vlad of Soara. Our boy doesn't even say anything to him this time, and the guy is smart enough to know that the feeling is definitely not mutual. The young swordsman is so irritated by his presence but manages to keep his cool. He tells Mercia that there's no reason for him to be glad to meet him. If anything, he has tons of reasons to never want to meet the blonde bastard that almost killed him. Hearing this, the annoying man just teases him, claiming that their situation is quite sad. He also suggests that his intentions of not wanting to go to a dangerous place weren't conveyed properly. The fact that he's trying to blame Rudiger's team for the risk they faced by going after the dragon almost makes Vlad lose his shit, so he tells Mercia to stop with the bullshit and get lost if he's done talking. This glimpse of rage intrigues Mercia. He is really impressed by Vlad's sharp but calm aura and wonders how the kid managed to mature so much in such a short time. He doesn't know the answer, but he feels that it's how it should be anyway. After all, one must know to hold their head up high wherever they are at, and it's clear that that's the kind of person Vlad was born to be. Seeing that the kid is this close to snapping at him for real, he decides to cut to the chase. Mercia claims that he'll ask a few questions and then disappear from this place, and before Vlad can even give him a go-ahead or not, he suddenly asks our boy if his heart runs wild every time he sees a dragon. This question catches our boy off guard, and it becomes clear that Mercia might know a lot more than he's been letting on. Vlad thinks deeply about this and recalls his battles against the remnants of the dragons. While he's still thinking, Mercia suddenly insinuates that our boy felt thirsty after seeing the blue blood of the Lindblom. Vlad becomes really nervous at this point because he truly felt something weird after seeing the blood. He begins to panic, and that's when Mercia blatantly asks him if he wanted to drink the dragon's blood. While our boy is stuck in the hot seat, the scene changes and the story continues in Sturma, the Bayezid County main city. There, we see that Vlad and the others have finally arrived, and while everyone else is probably having a good night's rest, our boy can't get any sleep. He's up all night, with so many thoughts running through his mind. He can get Mercia's last question out of his head and all he's been thinking about. After being asked if he wanted to drink the dragon's blood, Vlad was pretty offended, so he wanted to snap at the bastard, but then again, the guy had a point. The young swordsman already knew that his heart would race anytime he saw a dragon, but there was even some sort of resonance to his heart when he faced the Lindblum. He can't understand how Mercia got to know about that, so he can't help but wonder who on earth Mercia actually is. He doesn't get how the guy knows things about him that he doesn't even know about himself yet, and while he's still trying to make sense of everything, he gets drawn out of his thoughts all of a sudden by the knock on his door. As you can imagine, he's not in the mood to talk to anyone, so he angrily tells whoever it is to get lost, stating that he doesn't want to be disturbed. Just then, Rudiger opens the door a bit, feeling unwelcome by Vlad's tone. He knows that the boy must be stressed out, but still feels that he shouldn't be that harsh. After all, he's not the only one who's fought dragons in the Bayezid house. Rudiger has also been on the battlefield fighting against a dragon, 2 times for that matter, so he still expects that he will be respected accordingly. Of course, Vlad had no idea that the person at his door was his master's older brother, so he shoots up from his bed and immediately apologizes. He explains that people kept coming to ask him about the subjugation this time around, so he just assumed that he was one of the curious fans. Hearing this, Rudiger is pretty relieved, and jokingly claims that he was afraid Vlad had an unknown grudge towards him or something. He asks if he can come in, and of course, our boy welcomes him right in. Rudiger takes a look around the room and takes it all in because he's never really been in a servant's room before, so he doesn't exactly know what they look like. Our boy already knows that Sir Rudiger didn't leave the comfort of his chambers to come get a tour of the servants' room, so he nervously asks the man what brings him here. In response, Rudiger just reveals the huge case he brought with him, claiming that it contains the sword he promised our boy earlier. He claims that it was personally forged by the top blacksmith in Bayezid, and then opens the huge scabbard to unveil the magnificent sword. Not only is it strong and sharp, but it's also very light and well balanced according to the master. He claims that the sword was forged by a blacksmith who's not only reputable in the north, but throughout the empire. As such, he's confident that the blade will definitely be something that is good enough for our boy to use. Seeing the stunning sword, Vlad is pretty overwhelmed by the whole thing. He can't believe the lengths that Sir Rudiger went to get the sword and claims that the sword is too much for him. However, the master doesn't agree with him, because he doesn't think the sword is too much for the dragon slayer. As far as he's concerned, this is the reward that Vlad deserves. He claims that he would have loved to give him the best artisan sword he could obtain, but he figured that it could have caused a lot of misunderstandings. That being said, he tells Vlad that there's no need to be concerned since he's not doing this with ulterior motives. After all, he knows how much his brother, Joseph, values the young swordsman. At this point, Vlad figures that there's no point fighting it anymore, so he gratefully accepts the sword. Rudiger then asks Vlad if he's seen Joseph, and our boy reveals that he did, but just for a short moment since the guy seemed really busy. Hearing this, Rudiger just finds it amusing because he feels like there are times when Joseph seems like the servant instead of Vlad. Apparently, all the scandals that our boy gets himself always need to be sorted out by Joseph. Our boy is surprised when he hears this because he has no idea what he did to make his master so busy. At this point, Rudiger realizes that the kid hasn't heard anything yet, and when Vlad asks him what he's talking about, he informs him that the Bayezid household has issued a summon to all knights. The scene changes after now, and outside, we catch up with Sir Lammond, who is currently with the head of the Bayezid family. The old knight reveals that he's thinking of ending his pilgrimage, so the lord asks him if he's come to a decision yet. In response, Sir Lammond reveals that it has truly been a tough time for him to even come to the conclusion. Lord Bayezid completely understands and suggests that Sir Lammond is ready to hand over this last ducat. The old geezer just nods in response, and the lord figures that it would weigh heavily on Vlad's shoulders since he's taking over such a great honor, and Lammond claims that this is exactly why he's giving it to the young swordsman. He's giving it to our boy as a knight and as a vassal of the Bayezid household. The old knight claims that he feels so relieved because it's like he's completed all of his duties finally. And when the lord hears this, he just thanks the veteran for devoting himself to the Bayezid household for such a long time. In response, Sir Lammond simply apologizes for causing any trouble this whole time. After this exchange, Lord Bayezid asks the old knight if he'll be returning to his hometown now, which he confirms. He admits that it's been a long time since he saw his own manor, and as such, he'd like to go home. Lord Bayezid is pretty sad to let such a loyal knight go, so he asks Sir Lammond to stay a few more days before leaving so that they can have a proper send forth for him. The old geezer is taken aback when he hears this. It's quite strange to him because he knows that Lord Bayezid isn't someone who has problems with bidding farewell. He's quite confused, so he asks the lord what the matter is. In response, the head of the Bayezid family reminds him that when someone new is about to appear, whenever someone else is about to retire. Hearing this, Sir Lammond immediately pieces everything together and realizes that this is the reason the man summoned all the knights. He asks the lord if he has also recognized the new one to take his place, and the Bayezid head just claims that those who are qualified deserve to enjoy the authority. This old lord is convinced that our boy will break the records by becoming both the youngest and also the one who becomes a true knight in the shortest amount of time. Hearing this, Sir Lammond just bursts into laughter, stating that such a record and tradition should be broken all the time. Lord Bayezid knows that the old knight is always big on tradition, so the fact that he just said something like that makes him even more certain about his decision. At this point, Sir Lammond feels like he's already gotten his retirement gift, so he's really looking forward to that day when all the knights will be gathered, because that's the moment a new honor will be born. 3 days later, we see Sir Jaeger walking down the long hallway of the mansion, and then all of a sudden, he stops in his tracks when he senses Vlad's presence. He turns around to look at his vassal properly and is absolutely blown away by what he sees. He begins to wonder if Lady Oksana even used magic on Vlad for his preparation, because the transformation is drastic. The green-eyed knight feels like she turned Vlad into a completely different person, and truly, our boy looks absolutely majestic. Unfortunately, he doesn't exactly seem excited about his new look. In fact, he even feels out of place for some reason, and so Jaeger figures that he must be really nervous. He asks the boy if he's got any nerves, and Vlad claims that he only feels flustered. His cheeks are bright red at this point, and he admits that this whole thing feels quite sudden to him. Hearing this, Sir Jaeger calmly assures him that he won't scold him for shaking like a leaf. He tells the boy that he'll let him off even if he trembles, and then reminds him that he's the reason why the door of knights will be opened today. That being said, Sir Jaeger steps up to the door and asks that Vlad be allowed to enter, because he's now standing there on the orders of the Count. At that moment, the huge doors are opened, and our boy is absolutely blown away by the majesty before his eyes, because he has just been allowed into the Hall of Knights. Just as he's about to walk in, he looks back and sees young Master Joseph watching him proudly. Joseph remembers how he could never stand in front of that door because he can't wield a sword. He always thought that it would be a line he'd never cross in his life, but today, it looks like Vlad has become the sword that finally came to him. With tremendous pride in his heart, he encourages Vlad to go on and enter into the Hall of Knights, congratulating him on his fear and calling him his sword. The red path is one path of honor, and the boy had walked that path without even realizing it. Step by step, this was the oath that he had dreamt of beyond the mires of the back alley. He was finally on the path toward the shining star, and now he's arrived at the star. Our boy walks down the red carpet with all the other knights standing on either side. At the end of the carpet, he kneels before Lord Bayezid, who's waiting there with his sword to officially make our young swordsman a knight. The Lord addresses our boy Vlad, servant of the Bayezid household, and commends him for reaching this place. He tells him that he did a great job and then hands him a scroll, which happens to be the ever-unchanging commandments of a swordmaster. Lord Bayezid tells Vlad to hold it in his left hand and urges him to engrave the following into his heart. The old man reminds him that a knight must always be able to see the world of possibilities, and reveals that it is the first commandment of the swordmasters. In that moment, we get to understand exactly what this commandment means. Even though our boy had met the older knights as enemies before, they had all protected the possibilities that he held, because that's the duty a knight should perform. Lord Bayezid goes on to tell Vlad that a knight must always listen to his conscience, which is the second commandment of the swordmasters. Our boy is equally able to relate this commandment to some of the knights he was lucky enough to meet. He remembers the mission with Sir Gregory in that village haunted by the evil priest. Even in that town that was filled with fog, the knights there gave everything they had, as they had risked everything, including their lives. If you stand in the place you ought to be in, then you must not hesitate when the time to act and do the right thing comes. And only one's conscience can determine what that is. Lord Bayezid places the blade of his sword on Vlad's shoulder once again and quotes the third and final commandment of the swordmasters, telling him that a knight must always pursue the path of honor. A knight must always keep their eyes able so that they can become honorable. They must strive to become honorable so that they can be without a shred of embarrassment. Vlad understands these 3 commandments, and he's already been living a life in line with them, so it's not a problem when Lord Bayezid asks him to swear before his sword and before the commandments of the knights. Our boy, Vlad of Soara, had always looked at the possibility of being the sword that has no frills, and the red-haired girl who stands by his side can testify to that. Even though he lives in the mires of the back alley, he had always kept to what was right. Besides Jemima, Jorge, the knight who had protected Rose's smile, will also testify for our boy's conscience, and because the young boy looked up to the stars, he was able to move forward with hopes of holding them. While it was something he has kept to without realizing it, he was someone who did all he could to keep to it. The sword with no frills who had struggled with him will also testify to that. With all this evidence to show that our boy is deserving of this knighthood, he swears before Lord Bayezid, the sword and the commandments, that he will give all he has to observe the commandments of the swordmasters. In response, the Lord Peter Bayezid, master of the Bayezid household, commands Vlad, who was a lowly servant when he knelt before him, to arise as a knight. Hearing this, our boy gets back on his feet, and from that moment, he becomes known as the Knight of Lady Alicia, the one who protected the lives of the children who were blessed by San Racino, the dragon slayer who spilled the blood of the Lind Bloom, and a knight recognized by the Bayezid household, the one and only Vlad of Soara. This young man was once the boy who came from nothing, and now he had made something out of himself by his own will. All the other knights in the room smile with pride, including Sir Rudiger and Sir Jaeger, who are especially delighted on this day. But the truth is, none of them is as proud as the man who took him into his home, young Master Joseph, who's currently watching everything just outside the Hall of Knights. Our boy's rise from the bottom is something that all the stars gathered in this place will testify to. It's a great moment in the history of the Bayezid household, and as they all honor the newest addition to the Knights, the voice in our boy's head tells him that he's done great before addressing him as Sir Vlad, for the first time ever. The scene changes and we're suddenly taken to Trinova, the current Gaydar county. The notorious Count Gaydar sits on his throne while one of his advisors suggests that this is a time to advance forward without hesitation. However, the dwarves behind them are making the situation unpleasant. For this reason, the Count has decided to slowly make his moves like the other nobles did. He points out how the only Heinel member left, Alicia, remains unmarried. The ruler of the West, Sigmund Gaydar, makes this point with a sinister look on his face, and when his subject confirms that the lady still isn't married, he explains that this must not be the case. After all, he doesn't think that there's any way a frail woman like her can survive in such a dangerous world all by herself. It's at this moment that we see that he's talking to Godin because he suddenly tells the rogue knight that he needs him to get involved this time around. Hearing this, Godin simply asks Count Gaydar to tell him what he has to do, so the massive villainous ruler of the West tells him to go to Damer with his son. He wants Godin to get a good justification in that place, which leaves the rogue knight taken aback. He's surprised that Count Gaydar wants justification instead of violence and war, but while he's still pondering on this, the ruler of the West simply praises him, knowing that he won't disappoint. In response, the white-haired mercenary vows to do his very best on this assignment. After this interaction, the story takes us back to Sturma, where we catch up with Peter Bayezid and his household. During the little meeting, he points out how he has put the young boy Vlad in the position that his son Joseph wished for. In response, the young master just thanks his father, and the Lord goes on to reveal that the Lord of the North will host a meeting where everyone will gather very soon. This news catches Joseph off guard because he didn't expect that the great assembly would take place. His father confirms this, and the young master is left stunned for a few seconds. The great assembly that hasn't been held in over 10 years is suddenly taking place, so he's really shocked. There was no sign of that happening at all, so he wonders if this is just how secretive the preparation was. But then again, he feels that maybe it was rushed so that no one would be able to see it coming. Joseph is really bothered about the meeting, and while he's busy panicking, his father reveals that he wants to sit next to Alicia Heinel, the Lord of Damer, during the Great Assembly. This shocks Joseph even more, but before he can process it properly or even try to protest, Peter Bayezid starts talking about how the Heinel household has benefited from the North and Central keeping each other in check for a long time. He opens a bottle of wine as he says this and then concludes by suggesting that it's time for Heinel to make a decision. The man wants Damer to decide if they will become a Great of the North or an abandoned land of the Central. The wise lord wants to apply pressure now because he knows that the Heinel household will become food for the Eagle of the West if they don't make a choice quickly. Peter Bayezid reveals that the era of peace is over and claims that now is the time for the people to come together and fight for survival. Damer has maintained neutrality for long enough, and Lord Bayezid believes that they have no choice but to make a very tough decision soon. Joseph is really worried about Lady Alicia and wonders if she'll choose the North, but his father just smiles mischievously upon hearing this. He already knows that Joseph has gone to great lengths to ensure that she makes that decision, and even though the son is surprised, his old man promises to support him fully, because in matters concerning Damer, Joseph represents the entire Bayezid household. Hearing this, Joseph is just overwhelmed, but he eventually pulls himself together and makes his way out. As he walks away, his father watches him and thinks about how the young master has had to struggle all his life because he was born without sharp fangs. However, he's ready to support him this time because he's really stuck on this issue. After all, the Heinel household isn't the only thing that will affect them. Peter Bayezid knows that the longer he takes to make his decision, the higher the probability that his household's blood will be spilled. For this reason, he decides that he must put an end to this in his generation. The cycle of this endless fight is like a curse that has taken a toll on him, so he's determined to break it once and for all. Later that evening, as the sun sets, Sir Lammond takes Vlad up to the top of the manor to show him something. There, our boy is blown away by the view, claiming that he never knew this was how the scenery up here was. In response, the old knight reveals that he wanted to show him this place at least once. He points out how the castle walls look redder now than any other time of the day, claiming that the walls of Sturma have endured time by feeding off of the blood of their enemies. But sadly, he also mentions how they've been fed by the blood of the Bayezid household. Vlad can tell from the tone of his voice that he's heartbroken about this. The old man admits that blood is necessary in order to protect something, and then explains that knights are the people who have sworn to offer up their blood gladly when the time that blood is needed comes. The tone gets really serious all of a sudden as the old knight informs our boy that he will have to offer up his blood once that day comes. In response, Vlad just gives him a warm smile and assures him that he already knows this. Hearing this, the old geezer finally decides that it's time to tell Vlad his name, so he reveals that it's Lammond. Our boy is taken aback because that confession came out of nowhere. He expresses his confusion, so the old knight tells him to call him Sir Lammond henceforth. While Vlad is still trying to understand what's going on, the old man hands him his last ducat, telling him to take it. Our boy is reluctant because he doesn't know what it is, so Sir Lammond tells him that it's payment for breaking his armor. Vlad takes it from him but scrutinizes it because he doesn't get how the old geezer intends to pay for his armor with the rusty old copper coin. While the kid is busy examining the coin with disappointment in his eyes, Sir Lammond informs him that the coin is worth a lot more than the Grey Orc's leather armor he had. He knows that Vlad probably won't get it now, so he simply assured him that he'll realize the value of the coin when the time is right. Sir Lammond figures that Vlad must have received his mission when he was knighted, and our boy confirms this, revealing that he's departing in the morning. Hearing this, the old knight realizes that this is the last time they'll see each other in a while. With this in mind, he tells Vlad to come visit his manor if the chaotic situation somehow settles sometime in the near future. In response, the young knight assures his favorite old man that he'll do just that. He even jokes about how he'll collect the rest of his insufficient payment when he visits. It's a sad moment for sure to see them having to go their separate ways, but they manage to make it funny since they're both comedians when they want to be. The two share a wholesome moment, and Lammond tells Vlad that he can visit anytime he wants. He stretches out his hand for a farewell handshake, and instead of calling out boy a brat like he usually does, he finally addresses him as Sir Vlad. Our boy is taken aback by this, but the retired knight simply gives him a warm smile, stating that their time together has been fun. It's time to say goodbye, and even though our boy is sad to let this old man go, a smile creeps up on his face too as he shakes the man's hand. He thanks the old knight for everything he's taught him, and that's where they finally part ways. The story continues in Dermer, where a familiar blue-haired princess is currently frustrated that no one has come to see her even though it's been a month since she sent that letter. Her advisor calms her down, urging her to be more patient and reminding her that they always have to be prepared for the worst situation, because only then will they be prepared for whatever they must do. The clock is ticking for the Heinel household, and Alicia is starting to fear that the worst situation is already upon her. She contemplates following what Count Gaydar said in his letter and marrying his eldest son, but she doesn't even know what to think anymore. She asks her advisor if she should just marry into the Gaydar household, and the old man is absolutely shocked. That's definitely not what he was trying to suggest, so he feels that he may have chosen his words wrongly the first time. Despite his attempts to calm the lady down, she's still shaking in anger from receiving the wedding invitation, which was more like a one-sided notice. Count Gaydar probably didn't give her much of a choice with that offer, and she knows that the West completely disrespected her. Even though they sugarcoated their intentions, she knows that it can't be good for her because there was no promise to what the future of Heinel would be like. All she saw was their own greed. At the moment, Lady Alicia is even more confused because she doesn't trust anyone around her. From the north, to central, to even Count Gaydar, she feels that they're all desperate for her land. As far as she's concerned, everyone around her is a thief, so she's extremely careful about her decision. Seeing how frustrated she is, her advisor tells her not to worry too much, assuring her that their opportunity to rise again will come again with time. Hearing this, she agrees with him and decides that they'll just keep trying until then. Even though she's claimed not to trust those around her, she can't help but wonder why she hasn't heard back from Bayezid. It's like she's anticipating their pitch because she doesn't get why it's so difficult for them to send a servant. At this point, her advisor suggests that they must have calculated it all, stating that they must know the terrain advantage that Dermer has. However, there is only one thing this old man is concerned about. Before he can reveal it, a servant barges into the room to inform the Baron that Count Gaydar's people have just arrived. The guy looks terrified, probably because he knows that the ruler of the West brings nothing good. As for Alicia, she just looks exhausted because she didn't expect that they'd come so suddenly. Knowing the state of the princess, the advisor offers to reschedule her meeting with Gaydar's people to the next day, promising to buy her as much time as possible. The blue-haired lady already knows that this visit is not a good one, and she is really bothered. Her advisor knows this as well, so he just urges her to brace herself for what's coming. After all, a starved eagle shows no mercy. Just outside the Heinel barony, we are introduced to Count Gaydar's arrogant successor, Istvan. The young man hasn't even entered the place, and he's already commenting on how backward the place is. As soon as he says this, Godden informs him that Dermer has always been like this, stating that they prefer diplomacy to war. They'd rather resort to family than commerce, so upon hearing this, Istvan concludes that they're boring in other words. This lazy brat suddenly asks to confirm that he doesn't have to do anything on this visit, so Godden informs him that he'll at least have to introduce himself to the Lady Alicia, since he's the one they're trying to marry her to. Hearing this, Istvan asks what else he needs to do, so Godden tells him that he must also pretend to be interested in the lady. At this point, the lazy douchebag claims that he doesn't like the arrangement since he doesn't like doing any form of work. Seeing that the eldest son might be a problem, Godden decides to set things straight before they meet Alicia. He informs Istvan that he needs to fulfill the duties that come with his bloodline. Hearing this, he finally asks why his father is complicating things this time around. Count Gaydar has always been a man of violence and taking whatever he wanted. That was the simple logic he lived by, so Istvan is really thrown off by all this diplomacy and peace talks. At this point, he starts to think that they might not actually have the power to take Dermer from the Heinel household, so Godden explains that the North has never failed to protect what they have to protect. He explains that the West made it this far by taking what they want, while the North got to this point by protecting what they have. Count Gadar is now the ruler and alliance leader of the West, so it's only natural for him to be more cautious when considering the first step outside their territory. That being said, the rogue knight is able to make Istvan understand why they're taking this approach. Besides, the eldest son can tell that his father is very serious about this assignment for the fact that Godin tagged along. Istvan still doesn't seem so interested in any of this, so the clever knight informs him that the lady in question is actually very beautiful. He claims that she is said to be peerless, even when taking the women of nobility in this region into account. Upon hearing this, Istvan finally looks interested for the first time since the journey started and admits that he's now motivated to behave. Meanwhile, at Brigantes, the Empire capital, something seems to be brewing in the Dragon Blood Dukedom. There, Mercia returns to his old father, Sarnis Dragulia, the Dragon Blood Duke. The old man asks for a report, so the blondie informs him that the white dragon was slain by the Knights of the North. Duke Sarnis is furious when he hears this, feeling that the barbaric North still don't know their place. Before the old man can rant his way into a heart attack, his son reveals that his trip wasn't for nothing, claiming that he discovered a young boy in the north. Apparently, Mercia is convinced that Vlad is a young dragon who has yet to open his eyes, which leaves his father in shock. However, he stands on this conviction, asking the old man if he's ever been to the north before. In response, Sarnis Dragulia confirms that he's been everywhere, claiming that he spent his whole life spreading seeds all over the continent. A seed is a being of possibility, and no one knows what it could become, so to hear that there's a human who might be a dragon, the Duke feels that it was worth dedicating his life spreading those seeds. He asks Mercia if his heart resonated after seeing the child in question, and the blondie confirms this. The old man then asks what Vlad looked like, so Mercia reveals that the child has gold hair and blue eyes, just like them. Those colors aren't a coincidence. They're the colors that have been passed down through the blood of the Dragulia household. Hearing this, the old blood Duke becomes even more intrigued. Seeing that the boy hasn't called forth the dragon's fragments, Duke Sarnis Dragulia figures that Vlad still has not opened his eyes, just like Mercia suggested. Now that this insane discovery has been made, Sarnis once again admits that the work of waiting for seeds to grow is always tough, just like spreading them. However, he's been in this world long enough to know that humans do the same thing over and over again. That's how he lived as well after all, so he reveals that he deeply wishes to meet this special child that his son discovered. Alright, so on a rather dramatic note, this final panel brings us to the end of the episode. We only have a few more chapters left until we're fully caught up, and I'll be sure to cover all of those in the next video. If you're excited for it, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the upload notification. Until next time.